were looking forward very much to seeing Krishna, because Krishna was their own homeboy, who's now the ruler of Dwarka. The residents of Vrindavan, headed by Nanda Maharaj, Prabhupada says here, had been living in great anxiety because of separation from Krishna and Balaram. Taking advantage of the solar eclipse, they all came to see their life and soul, Krishna and Balaram. The inhabitants of Vrindavan were well-wishers and intimate friends of the Yadu dynasty. This meeting of the two parties after long separation was a very touching incident. Both the Yadus and the residents of Vrindavan felt such great pleasure in meeting and talking together that it was a unique scene, because they had a shared history. Initially, because Krishna he appeared in Mathura, which is just next to Vrindavan. But the mood of Mathura is very different. It's the royal capital. Even today, it always astonishes me that Vrindavan and Mathura are 7 miles apart in India. But they have never mixed. It's so deeply ingrained in the culture, because everywhere else in India there's rampant development, including in Vrindavan and Mathura. But somehow that tract of land between Mathura and Vrindavan, it's government forest land. It's not supposed to be built in, but that never stopped anyone before. But somehow it remains two distinct places with very, very different atmospheres in Mathura and Vrindavan to this day. But they're friends. The inhabitants of Mathura, the inhabitants of Vrindavan, they're friends, and each town has got its parikrama. The village of Vrindavan and the city of Mathura, they have the parikrama path. But there's also a parikrama path that goes around both of them. I've never been on it. It must take a full day to do that. And one day of the year, the residents of both places, they go on parikrama around both places. It's part of the culture. So there is difference. Quite deep difference between Mathura and Vrindavan, but they are also friends, and the same was the case between. It's the same also between Vrindavan and Dwarka. After he defeated Kamsa. And then eventually he went and built Dwarka. He had to have a safe place because there were so many demons then as now. And so in order to establish a safe fortress for his extended family of so many queens, he built Dwarka in the sea, in the Bay of Dwarka. And everyone thought that, this is just some quaint mythology. But now they have actually found the remains of some fantastic sort of Atlantis type city under the waves of Dwarka. I haven't heard much about it for the last 10 or 15 years, but it was reported a few times in the press back in the, I think, early 90s. And it was the structures that they found under the water were made of stones, very large stones, huge stones. And reportedly, although it's difficult to investigate because the water's full of silt, it's not very clear, but reportedly it was very sophisticated stone masonry, the ramparts that they found. They found traces. Much more could be discovered in time. It's a question of money, I suppose. Of an enormous fortified city beneath the waves. So this is Dwarka. Anyhow, there was a close relationship because they had a shared history of having cared for Krishna and Balaram. When Krishna and Balaram were little boys, they were smuggled out, or just babies, they were smuggled out of Mathura, and they were brought up by the cowherd forest community of Vrindavan. So when they met after a long celebration, they were all jubilant, Prabhupada says. Their hearts were throbbing. Their faces appeared like freshly bloomed lotus flowers. There were drops of tears falling from their eyes. The hair on their bodies stood on end because of extreme ecstasy, and they were temporarily speechless. In other words, they began to dive in an ocean of happiness. So emotion is, a very important part of our Krishna conscious tradition. We don't suppress emotion. Emotion is a good thing. And affectionate relations between devotees is a wonderful, well, it's described here, they were diving in an ocean of happiness. It can sometimes be like that. While the men were meeting in that way, Prabhupada goes on, the women were also meeting one another in the same manner. They were embracing each other in great friendship, smiling very mildly, and looking at one another with much affection. When they were embracing each other in their arms, the saffron and kumkum powder spread on their breasts was exchanged from one person to another, and they all felt heavenly ecstasy. Due to such heart-to-heart embracing, torrents of tears glided down their cheeks. The juniors were offering obeisances to the elders. The elders were offering their blessings to the juniors. They were thus welcoming one another and asking after each other's welfare. Ultimately, however, all their talk was only of Krishna. All the neighbours and relatives were connected with Lord Krishna's pastimes in this world, and as such, Krishna was the centre of all their activities. Whatever activities they performed, social, political, or religious, were transcendental. I often thought there's an extraordinary atmosphere at Rath Yatra every year. I could never really put my finger on it. We have other festivals. We have Vyasa Puja and Janmashtami and Diwali and so on, but nothing is comparable to the mood of Rath Yatra. Especially I personally have fond memories, as anyone who was there I'm sure would have, when we used to have Rath Yatra in Battersea Park, and so freed from all the restraints of, it's a bit tricky sometimes in Trafalgar Square because the authorities are so draconian these days. But the mood is so wonderful that everyone comes to Rath Yatra. It doesn't matter, which group they're in, or whether they've fallen out with somebody or whatever it is. They're all there. And increasingly, as the years go by, all the generations are there now too. There are the older members, who struggle just to go on the 2-mile procession. And there are the young ones who are leaping around with excitement and everything in between. And it is very, very heartwarming. And there is this warmth. And I see now that this is part of the transcendental spirit of Rath Yatra, which is right here in the account in the Krishna book.